everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are delighted to be welcoming Kevin O'Hare and the dancers of the Royal Ballet to the Cambridge Union for an exclusive evening of live performance and discussion. We're thrilled to collaborate today with one of Britain's foremost cultural institutions. The Royal Ballet is one of the world's greatest classical ballet companies, based at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. Under the directorship of Kevin O'Hare, the company unites tradition and innovation in world-class performances and is committed to enriching people's lives through dance. I'm Kyoka, and today we are going to be speaking with the director and the dancers of the Royal Ballet, learning about their creative practice and glimpsing in live performance of Giselle. Whether you're a seasoned ballet goer or entirely new to ballet, this evening should be a great way to learn about the Royal Ballet Company and its creative practice. So please join me in welcoming the director of the Royal Ballet Company, Kevin O'Hare.
Hello, and good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here in this amazing building, and we're really honoured to have been invited. And I hope that today we can, tonight, learn, for people that don't know what the Royal Ballet is and what a ballet company does, how we hopefully, as Kyoka said, enrich people's lives, and also about the practice and how we work together to create what we do, because it's a mixture of this amazing self-discipline and practice that we all work together, but also a very creative environment as well. And the Royal Ballet has a huge repertoire of work that it produces, everything from the classics that we probably all have heard of, Giselle, which we'll be seeing extracts of tonight, Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, The Sleeping Beauty, right through to the most contemporary of ballets. We just opened a new full-length work called The Dante Project by Wayne McGregor, which was, I'm glad to say, a huge hit, but also it's fantastic how we can move ballet forward and entice a new audience.
So the Royal Ballet is really renowned for its rich repertory of heritage choreographies and modern innovation. Could you tell us a bit more about what goes into putting on a ballet? So what are the stages involved, and how do you decide which productions to put on, and how many performances to include, and how to organize the casting?
Yeah, so a ballet company is a very very unusual concept now. In theatre, very much you don't have companies as such. So even somewhere like the Royal Shakespeare Company or the National Theatre, they tend to be, each play is cast for that particular project. Whereas a ballet company is a company that's there all the time. The Royal Ballet is actually 90 years old this year. It's 90 dancers, and we have a school. And so the idea is that, and now with our outreach work, as young as 7 and 8, we go into normal schools and scout out for people that are just interested in dance. And we then invite them to a program called Chance to Dance. And the dream is that these young children go to Chance to Dance. We help them get scholarships to private schools, private ballet schools. And then they might join the lower school of the Royal Ballet School, White Lodge, which is a school I went to. And then they join the upper school, and then they join the Royal Ballet. And so there's this massive trajectory from sort of 7-year-old to being a principal dancer of the Royal Ballet. And within the ballet company, you start off as a corps de ballet member. We call them artists. So as you saw at the beginning of that, where sometimes you see a lineup of it can be ladies or men dancing together, and slowly then you start to get opportunities to do soloist roles, and then hopefully you then become a principal doing principal roles. We've got 2 principals with us tonight, Sarah Lamb and Marcelino Sambé. So that's the idea of the company, and within that company then, as we've just said, there's this massive amount of repertoire. So the idea, I think, for the Royal Ballet is that we've got sort of one of the broadest repertoires in the world. And we have the classics that I mentioned before, and then we have 2 very well-known choreographers that found the founder choreographer of the Royal Ballet, Frederick Ashton, and he started to really develop the style of the company, the sort of way we looked at telling a story. And then after him, Kenneth Macmillan came along, and he pushed boundaries even more. And so he created our first Romeo and Juliet in 1965, and then did ballets like Manon, Myling, and really pushing how you tell a story through dance. And I think those two choreographers gave us a distinctive style of how we present ballet. So I would say for the Royal Ballet, if you come and see us, when we have these wonderful dancers like you will see, Sarah and Marcelino, but we're also about the full company and how we work together to tell a story in the most naturalistic way. Of course, we're wearing ballet tights and we're wearing point shoes and all of those things, but we want to make it as real as possible for the audience so they can get involved in the story. And then since then, when I took over the company nearly 10 years ago, we'd had a period where people were sort of nervous of creating new work. And so I wanted to sort of change that. And so in the last 9 years, we've done, I think, probably 6 brand new full-length ballets, about 20, 25 new works that are shorter works within the repertoire of the company. And I feel that sort of mix between the two really helps us develop. So you can, if you work with the most contemporary choreographer in the world today, you can then learn from them, and then that informs how you do your next performance of Swan Lake or Sleeping Beauty. But I think I was saying earlier, I think one of the amazing things about a ballet company is, you know, I've talked about the hierarchy of the company, but I think there's very few places, there's very few places where you might be working with somebody that you've known since you were 11 years old and knows all about you from that age, and all your faults and all your good things about you, but also that we all, as a dancer, you start the day with a ballet class. And so you're in a studio all together. So whether you are one of the top dancers like Sarah or Marcelino, or you're one of the youngest dancers coming from the school, you all start the day on this same level. And it's really fascinating. And I think that really creates the company atmosphere, the family atmosphere, and the feeling of a team. And it's been interesting over the years when I've been doing different things like this. And, you know, once I was at the business school in Lausanne, they felt that a ballet company was a really good way of looking at how you run a company because of this the nature of working together to create this one thing at the end of the day, which was the performance.
Oh, no, thank you. That's really interesting. And I was especially intrigued by what you said about the kind of the familial and the convivial sense of coming together. Out of curiosity then, so what do you do in your role as director of the Royal Ballet, and what was your kind of personal journey like? You mentioned that you were at White Lodge, and yes.
Well, I was born in Yorkshire of Irish parents. I'll keep it short. We don't need to do the whole of my life history, but I have a brother who's about 5 years older than me, and a sister who's a few years older than that. And like all young girls in that time, it would have been the 60s, early 70s, she went to ballet class on a Saturday. And unusually, the teacher was a male teacher. And so my mother sent my brother just to watch my sister doing her ballet class, and he was about 5 years old. And the teacher said, well, you know, boys can dance as well. And so he got him up dancing. So by the time I was 5 years later of that age, it was our hobby. And so we did a lot of dancing. It wasn't really ballet. And it was a bit of tap and song and dance and what we'd call theatre dancing now, but those sort of things. And so I just got a love for theatre and and being a performer. So I did lots of people a lot of the time say, especially in those days in the 60s, 70s, I was a bit younger than that, where you teased. Probably not. I don't think I was really at school because people were quite impressed. I was on television a little bit, doing little things. My biggest claim to fame is that I was in the film Bugsy Malone. You're probably all too young to know what that is, but at the time it was considered a fantastic film. It was all young people playing gangsters, and it was a sort of song and dance musical, and it was by a great director, actually, Alan Parker directed it. And my other claim in that is that he actually, in the middle of a shoot, told everybody on his microphone, said, "Who's that boy over there? Can you tell him to shut up?" Because I couldn't stop talking. But it was an amazing experience to work with these people. And then slowly in Yorkshire, there was more and more emphasis in the dance schools around ballet. And I went to a summer school that had just started in Ilkley in Yorkshire. And a lot of famous teachers came to that summer school, and I met some of the stars of the past, people that have worked with Diaghilev. Now, Diaghilev was this amazing impresario that brought over all the Russian dancers to Monte Carlo, and then they performed in London and Paris, and they worked with people like Nijinsky and Picasso and Stravinsky and all of these amazing collaborators. And so it was quite something as a young guy, just seeing these people and their history and what dance could be and what ballet could be. And so there was somebody there from the Royal Ballet School, and they said to my mother, "Does your son want to audition for the school?" And so I auditioned for the school, not really knowing what I was going to, but actually got into the school and then went through both of those institutions, the lower school and the upper school, and then joined the South Wales Royal Ballet, which was the touring company of the Royal Ballet. So the Royal Ballet at that time had the Royal Ballet that was resident in Covent Garden, and then there was the South Wales Royal Ballet that was based at South Wales Theatre, but also toured England and internationally. I actually performed twice here on Jesus Green. Every summer we'd have a massive tent that became a theatre. And we used to come to Cambridge because they didn't have a big enough theatre for the company to perform in. And so I learnt a lot there. And then in 90, the company moved from being the South Wales Royal Ballet to the Birmingham Royal Ballet. And it was always the dream. We were founded by a woman called Dame Lynette de Valois, and she always felt that there needed to be a company outside of London. She's quite a visionary, really. I mean, that's what a lot of people talk about in the arts today, moving things out of London. And she wanted the company to be out there. And so before she died, the company moved to Birmingham. And I was a principal dancer there for however many years. I stopped in 2000 and stopped dancing and decided I'd like to be in management. And so I was very lucky. I trained at the Royal Shakespeare Company in management. And then I joined, and I always thought I would be going to sort of, administration. I went away from the artistic side and then worked as an administrative director with the Royal Ballet. And then when the previous director, Dame Monica Mason, retired, I then decided I'd like to try and go this way. So it's sort of unusual because I think most people tend to stick to one route. But the fact that I was a dancer, then learnt about administration and management and did that for quite a long time, and then have gone back to my sort of hopefully artistic roots. And so it's a fun balance between those things.
What a rich and kind of like various sort of
life
story you've had. Very cool.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So yes, kind of pivoting from that, what do you think have been, I suppose, the highlights of this past season at the Royal Ballet, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, glad to be back on stage. As you can imagine, during the pandemic, when it happened, we were performing Swan Lake, and like the whole world, everybody was feeling something was going on, and we realized that we were going to have to close the theatre. And we actually had a performance at Swan Lake on, I think it was the 12th or 13th of March. And it was amazing. The company danced out of their skin, really. And at the end, you really felt the audience didn't want to let the company go because everybody sort of knew this was going to be the last performance. And so after that, we had to close. We had to think of ways of keeping, you can imagine these dancers are at the top of their game, athletes, how you keep them fit. Like everybody else, we found out what Zoom was and arranged very quickly how to teach ballet class, through Zoom. For those of you who don't know, I talked about class. class is where we start at the bar with very gentle exercises, and we warm the body up, and we build those exercises while still holding a bar, and we work through. That's normally about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we clear the bars if we were in a studio, and then we start again with simple exercises until we turn more, we jump more. And the daily class is used in normal times to keep yourself fit, keep yourself active, but also working on your technique, and also finding, playing around with how you might work on a jump, how you might work on a turn or a pirouette. But for these 4 months when we were in our kitchens and living rooms, we had to just do it to keep people, just to try and keep that level of fitness. And of course, since I was a dancer, there's been so much more development. So we know about Pilates, we know about strength and conditioning, we know about weight training, we know about yoga, we know about all of these things, and so gyrotonics. So we use of all of these, and we've learned a lot from the sports world. We don't have the money of the sports world, but we try and learn from them as much as we can, and so use some of those scientific findings and looking after the dancers. So we spent about 4 months doing that. In solidarity, I hadn't danced a class in 20 years, but I said I would do class in my kitchen with the dancers. I made sure that the camera was sort of up here so they couldn't see my feet, because I knew I wouldn't probably look as good as them. But they were quite amazing, and we really kept together. And slowly, we were able to come back into the Opera House to train after about 4 months. And then the last year had been an on and off. We were about to open, and then we had to close again. We managed to do 4 nutcrackers in a COVID-free way. We sort of, I was calling it CSI Nutcracker. We were sort of forensically going into the Nutcracker to see how we could do it without people touching each other, which is quite difficult, but we sort of managed it. And then we had to close down again. And then eventually in May, we opened to do a series of shorter performances with a smaller audience of 750 people. So it was with a great thrill that we opened in October with Romeo and Juliet, a full company on stage, a full house of 2,200 people. And since then, we've had the Dante project, which was this big new ballet, as I said, with Wayne McGregor. And then we went on to perform Giselle, which we're performing now. And then highlights of the rest of the season, I think my friend and colleague here from the Opera House was saying, Christmas isn't Christmas without the Nutcracker. So we are back with the Nutcracker, and we're doing a lot of performances of that. We felt people needed it, so we've got about 30 performances of that. And then we're doing Swan Lake, and then we're closing the end of the season with a brand new ballet. So we opened with a brand new ballet, the Dante Project, and we're closing with a ballet by another associate of the company, Christopher Wheeldon, and it's based on the novel Like Water for Chocolate. Some of you might have read the novel or seen the movie, and so that's again mixing that the old classics with the new, and so we're very excited. And then fingers crossed, we are all on a plane to Japan and going to perform in Japan and take the company on tour. So that's the highlights of the year. So it's hopefully going to be great.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. So you mentioned that we're going to be seeing Giselle rehearse tonight, and I suppose we're going to be welcoming the dancers very shortly. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what they're going to be performing?
Yes, so we thought it would be really, hopefully, interesting for you to see. It's very unusual to be so close up for many of you who have been in the audiences at theatres. So we thought it'd be just interesting to see the dancers in their normal practice clothes, how they would work together on a few scenes from Giselle. Now, Giselle is one of the oldest ballets in the repertoire. So we're really, you will have seen some of the more contemporary things, and both of these dancers, Sarah and Marcelino, are amazing in the contemporary work. But for the first time, they're going to dance Giselle together. Sarah has danced it many times with different partners, but Marcelino is making his debut as Albrecht, which is the prince in the story. The story is quite a simple one. It's a romantic ballet, and it's about a young girl, Giselle, and she's a high-spirited young girl who has a little bit of she falls in love with this sort of stranger to the town, to the village. And this stranger is actually a count. And he has disguised himself as a peasant because he's set his eye on Giselle. But as something, how shall I put it, extracurricular activity, because he is actually engaged to Bathilde, who is his fiancée. So everybody in the village is slightly concerned about this relationship, but she is totally in love. And then the royal party happens to come on a hunting visit to this village, and it's then discovered that he is actually a count, and he's actually betrothed to somebody else. And this sends Giselle, high-spirited, on the edge, into despair, and she finds a sword and kills herself. And that is how Act 1 finishes. It's a cheery story. We then move on to Act 2, and Act 2 is where she's buried outside of the village because she's committed suicide, so she can't be buried in the village. So she's in this sort of slightly unmarked grave, and Albrecht, who is the count, he's full of remorse, and he comes to say his sorry to her graveside, and she appears to him as a spirit. And you don't need to know this, but there's a side story where there's a lot of spirits that want to kill every man that has betrayed them, and so she has been he's been sentenced to death, and basically she saves him. So it's a story for all time, but it's amazing actually. We've had 4 performances of it yet. As I say, Sarah and Marcelino haven't performed it, but somebody came last night to see the performance, and I was talking to them afterwards, and they said, "Oh gosh, I love coming to see all the contemporary work and everything." But actually, when you see these classic ballets and told in the right way, they can really move you in a way that any original play or ballet of today can. So it's very interesting to see how it works. So we're going to show you some extracts. I think Sarah and Marcelino are maybe there. We've got lovely Mark is here. He's going to bring us a bench, and we'll just...
So thank you, Kevin. So maybe once the bench is set up.
So I'll set the scene for you. So over here is a bench. Over there is Giselle's cottage. So we're going to do Act 1, we're going to face this way. We're going to do an extract from Act 1, and Act 2 we're going to do that way. So you get a little bit of a feeling of both. So this is the front, this is the facing the stage. So Giselle's cottage is over here. There is actually a little cottage here that Albrecht hides in. There's trees over there. And by Giselle's house, there's a little pot with daisies in it. And so Marcus brought us a daisy for that. So can I introduce Sarah and Marcelino? Oh. So I think I've set the scene for you. And just to say that, when we're rehearsing it, we talk about the characters, and Sarah, I'm sure, has her take on, she's played it many times, and how you like to play it, and how innocent you want to be. And then Marcelino doing it for the first time, so we were talking on the train, weren't we, or coming up, and he really thinks he can do anything. He's one of those guys, He thinks if he looks at Sarah or Giselle, that she will, of course, fall for him, and he doesn't see anything wrong with that. And so we want to see that, but of course, there is this frisson of love that's in the air as well. So it's a tricky role, actually, to pull off, because, as I said, when he comes to Act 2, you want the audience's sympathy to be with you, but he's been a bit of a cad to start with. So anyway, we've got some piano music that was recorded especially for this, and Johanna's up there, the stage manager, and this is, Albrecht has knocked on the door already, hasn't he? Yeah. We've had that. And then Giselle's coming out of her cottage. and see if you know what's going on, because this is really, sorry, this is really classical mime. So of course we do it in dance and mime, but it's really trying to tell the story. They've already met before, but this is him really saying, you know, I'm the guy for you. Okay, now we're going into Act 2, and just to show you a little bit so he's come to the grave, he's laid some flowers by the gravestone, and then she appears to him for the first time as a spirit. we're going to let Marcelino and Sarah are going to put on some warm clothes and then come and join us just to chat and hopefully maybe find some ice as well for her. Hopefully she's okay. So just as that last, I think probably the first time dance has been in this hall, I would say, and just that is the main part of the last act of Giselle. And after that, the wicked Queen of the Willies, who's the spirit, the leader in spirit, tries to force Albrecht to dance to death, and she keeps on intervening Giselle and saves his soul and saves him, and she goes back to the grave, and he is left to continue his life. But it is a story that can still be for today and one of redemption. So I think that's what audiences get from it, and as well as the beautiful classical dancing. And as you can see with the lifts that Marcelino was doing, how she can look like she's a spirit from another world. And
absolutely. I mean, if you see it in the theatres, like Giselle is like a wraith of smoke, so beautiful. And yes, Marcelino and Sarah was so breathtaking just now. Thank you. So while they're kind of getting changed, may I ask another question? We were really, really lucky this evening to watch Sarah and Marcelino dance live, but we understand that the Royal Ballet has also been exploring other modes of making ballet more accessible to a wider audience, such as, like streaming and sharing work digitally. Could you tell us a bit more about this? Or?
Yes, certainly. Yes, of course, things have even advanced through the pandemic even more so, but over the last sort of 10 years, we've started to bring our performances live to cinemas across the world, in the UK, and I think it's a great way of us getting to as many people as possible. I love the fact that, on one day only, we can sometimes beat, Spider-Man the movie or something as the most popular film in the country. And but we also take that across the world and also find other ways of doing it. So we recently made a film of Romeo and Juliet, but actually on location in a setting to bring it into a more realism, a real world, and that worked very well. Of course, online now we stream all of our each of our programs go live, and then you can watch them for 30 days, and we're working at the moment on an even better way of bringing that to as many people as possible. So it's really great, but also we can find new ways of moving, new ways of dancing, using our ballet technique, but also maybe involving an audience that don't think ballet's like a particular, everybody thinks it's what you've just seen, but there are different ways of dancing and movement that the Royal Ballet dancers do.
And I believe is Sarah and Marcelino ready to join us, or? Wonderful.
Not quite.
Not quite yet.
One more question.
Well, let's just wait until they get and change into something warmer. No, but that's really interesting. Do you find that is something which is characteristic of the Royal Ballet then, in terms of maintaining that rich line of tradition as well as also keeping in mind kind of modern and innovative trajectories?
Yeah, I think it's really important to know where you're coming from, and know where maybe you want to get to, but be very much in the present. And our founder said that, and I think it's good advice. And I think the fact that the company is most of the company have trained at some point with the Royal Ballet School, but it's a very international company, so we have dancers from across the globe. And I think we benefit from that so much, and where they've trained originally, their heritage, what they bring to the Royal Ballet is really important. And I think the more of that we can sort of tap into is really important. So whether it's somebody like Marcelino or Sarah or all the other dancers in the company, and I think it's really important that we keep pushing forward with that, but also remembering about our history.
You mentioned at the start as well that the Royal Ballet employs over 90 dancers and fosters young talent through the Royal Ballet School. What's it like working with such like a diverse group of people, whether in terms of background or age or seniority, and how do you kind of navigate these like differences and come together for what is like a moving performance on stage?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think we are a very diverse group of people, very different, come from very different backgrounds, but I think the one thing that brings us all together is our love of dance and what it could do for people, and for young and old. And the other day on Friday, we had a full opera house full of young kids from schools watching Giselle and loving it. And you might think, oh gosh, this is a world away from their worlds, but to be in a theatre, see the light as soon as the curtain opened, the cheers, and I sort of sometimes find it hard to imagine, because you think, oh gosh, you're watching so much on their iPads and their videos and all of that, but they really do get something out of seeing it real and live, and are amazed that, of course, the Opera House, you open the curtains and you can see this amazing scenery and setting, and really get involved in the story. And I think it's our duty to share that with as many people as possible, and to give as many things, many chances to as many people. So here we have Sarah and Marcelino. Do you need some water, or are you okay?
Thank you so much, Sarah and Marcelino. That was literally so breathtaking, and we were just waxing lyrical about it now. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. So Giselle is one of the great classics of the 19th century, and it's a potent evocation of where benign misunderstandings lead to heartbreaking consequences, and it's currently being performed at the Royal Opera House now, and it's going to be streamed later this year as well. How does it feel to be taking on such one of the most famous romantic ballets, and what would you say are the biggest challenges of the role? What's special for you, that sort of thing?
Well, it is my first time performing the role, and it's a ballet that I've been involved in for so long, but never in this specific character. It is actually one of the first ballets that really captivated my imagination, because I just always thought it would be so fun to do these two characters in one ballet in a way, because of course in the first act is that the ideal idea of a prince that has known everything forever, everything is always his, and he has this very confident look about him. Then the second act is almost like he's mad scene, he's almost like he's having so many visions, and it becomes very lyrical and very emotional. I just thought it's such a great ballet in that aspect, that has two characters in one. So I'm very, very excited to be able to fulfill that idea. Yeah.
Likewise, Giselle has an effervescence to her in Act 1, and she is in Act 2 in a state of death, but she's come back to be semi-alive to him. Is she in fact in a type of purgatory where she is almost, her apparition is as realistic as the physical being to Albrecht, or is it all completely in his mind? And that's something that you can interpret either way, but to physically to make her her limbs almost disappear, and to have that fluidity and grace, whereas in Act 1 you must see her humanism. So I think some people find one act easier to do than the other, just like in Swan Lake, the white swan versus the black swan. Some people, their personality is more inclined to one or the other. So the challenge is to find, whichever is more difficult for you, and to really try and raise yourself to that level where you can take them on equally well, yet of course show that they are completely different.
How intriguing. And I thought it was fascinating what you mentioned, both of you, about kind of the duality or the dynamism to the different characters. And Marcelino, you mentioned capturing two characters in one, for instance. So noting, kind of extending that idea a bit further, and noting your recent performances in both classical repertory, such as Giselle, such as Romeo and Juliet, but also in contemporary works, such as the Dante Project, which debuted earlier this season. Does performing in classical and contemporary roles feel any different for you? And if so, what are the differences like?
One nice thing about having a new role created is that there's no one on which you may be judged, because no one has come before. So that is, having your own creation is quite special. It's really, almost being part of the birth of something new. And so in that way, I find contemporary more freeing because I don't have these, shadows of history over my shoulder, which I feel that one does have in classical, yet I think the challenge is to try and, at least psychologically, try and rid oneself of that comparison, because comparisons are odious. We all know that, even though we continue to do it throughout our lives. But really, you just need to have the confidence that you can offer something to the character, something to the ballet, and that is the challenge with classical, especially when it's somewhat antiquated, or to try and find the realism there. I find when Giselle's mother says, she can't dance because she'll have a broken heart, or she might have a heart attack. I mean, we obviously know that this does happen. People are born with heart irregularities, so this is an actual real thing, whereas, at that time they didn't understand why it happened, but now we understand that these sort of medical conditions can exist. So it's an actual real thing, but we are interpreting it differently throughout history. And I think that we can show that quite, theatrically, or we can show it quite realistically. And it's interesting to play with that duality. Sorry, I've gone off topic. But in terms of contemporary, I do find that more freeing, more liberating. But there is something, I'm sure the mathematicians among you will find, that there's actually beauty within your, regimen, and within the constrictions or the technique, or, whatever discipline you have within that order. You do also have freedom. It is sometimes harder to do, and obviously it's something that you have to keep working on forever.
Sarah's created such a huge range of, as you were saying, in these now classics of now, so in The Winter's Tale, in Wayne's Wolf Works, in The Raven Girl, all these roles. Do you find when you go back to being Giselle or Odette Odile and so on, has that enhanced how you feel about those characters?
Yeah, undoubtedly, it has. I think, obviously, you can't say, oh, I'm this person today because of what happened yesterday. I mean, that will happen inevitably, no matter what, because time marches on, but every single experience obviously does. And I think I have eventually, it's taken me a very long time, realized that you can be less prescriptive in the classicals, and one can let oneself go more, whereas in contemporary, I don't ever feel like I have to follow a certain pattern, or a certain archetype. And so having that realization does absolutely inform my classical work, I think.
I find both styles very different, obviously, because contemporary and classical have connotations, but at the same time they inhabit very different worlds. When I work, for example, with Crystal Pite, someone that has a very specific contemporary language, I feel like it's almost like I'm going back to basics in learning a ballet in a way, because it's so specific, and I'm really trying to inhabit her world, which is completely different from when, for example, I worked then with Wayne McGregor, because I feel like he has found a way to choreograph with ballet dancers that kind of relates to what we do classically in a way, and it challenges in a cool way. So I feel like it really depends on what kind of contemporary piece you are working on. But I do find the classics very difficult in a way that I have such a preconceived idea of so many, because I've spent my youth and my young years watching archives of all this footage of these all amazing dancers that had been holding such high pedestal. And I always compare myself to those people, which is probably the hardest thing about being a classical dancer.
People have kept writing, even though we have Shakespeare and we have Cervantes and whereas I think probably most artists don't continually compare themselves to one, but I think ballet dancers, we probably do compare ourselves more than other artists, I assume.
In a way, it's a comparison of almost like venerating these people. I find such inspiration in those dancers that then I'm trying to equalize it. But obviously, this is a journey that every dancer goes through, and in the end, when you're out there on stage with those dark lights and just you, the audience, your partner, the people around you, you have nothing left but you. And I think that's then the beauty of, like, in those moments, I forget all the things that I've put in my mind and it becomes magical. And that's, yeah, the beauty of classicals.
So much. And kind of stemming from that, I think we understand that dancers have a set kind of choreography recorded by a system of notation, for instance. And how do you kind of work within those units to still put your sort of stamp of individuality and authenticity? How do you kind of make room for characterization and put your own stamp upon your own work?
For anything or for one?
I mean, you can refer to an example if you like.
Whenever we do a new ballet, there is someone notating, and especially for instance, any Wayne McGregor ballet, there's a notator. But at the same time, when it's being choreographed on you, you can still maybe do slight variations or, you know, have some irregularities to that. So because it is your own, they can't always tell you, no, you did it just like this yesterday, because it's a living and breathing thing. And you can go see one performance and see me flat on my back, or you can hopefully see another one where I'm not. So, you know, obviously things happen all the time. So I just think, yeah, we just don't ever think of it as tightly as that. I mean, I don't think anyone, when we're actually reading, it's almost, when you read notation, it's almost like reading the notation of music in a way. So, I mean, every single musician will play it slightly differently. That's just the same as a person. I mean, we all are, we contain multitudes, you know, so we're all completely different. And every day is going to be different. So every day that you dance, it's going to be slightly different. So I don't think anyone is ever so constricted by those parameters.
We have a tradition of, so the people that work with Sarah and Marcelino, generally, most of them have danced those roles before, but the best of coaches is the ones that give you the sort of options of, and see you and see how you can bring something to a particular part, rather than saying, you know, if Sarah said about if somebody was learning her role from the dancing project and she said, no, it's like this, you've got to do it like that, that would be the wrong approach. It's got to be, you've got to find yourself within the role, and I think the best of coaches do that, don't they?
Being in the Royal Ballet, it's such a house of creation, such a house of artists and actors, dancers. I always felt like every time I get given an opportunity by Kevin and the company, I always feel like I think they really want to see me play their role, and I always feel that that's my most important thing about it, is like really let my interpretation show through and like give a new point of view or something. So I always find that very important and very exciting about the process.
Yeah, it's been interesting suddenly being in this job, that really really not wanting to typecast people and put them in a box and say, this is what you are. Of course, beautiful classical ballet dancer, that's what you do. You don't do anything else. And I think it's much better for everybody, for the audience, for the dancers, for the creative people around, to really broaden your view of that particular dancer. And I think that's exciting to see.
Yes, wow, that's really interesting. And I suppose you also alluded to having roles created on you. So Sarah, that's Beatrice in Wayne McGregor's Dante project, for instance, and for Marcelino, your performance as the instrument in Kathy Marston's The Cellist. What's it like to have a role created on you? Can you tell us a bit more? Yes.
Yeah, Beatrice was a lot to live up to, obviously, the ideal woman and kind of the embodiment of beatific beauty and love, and, you know, the epitome of everything, almost God in a way. So that was, yeah, that wasn't hard. But I think obviously she shows forgiveness to Dante, and I suppose that is the highest form of love, really, isn't it? And that's when you're so selfless that you are able to relinquish the ego. And I think that it was quite, for me, really moving to have that as Ed Watson's final performance, because I was able to share the stage with him just before the end. And in a way, it was quite an honor to have that role to be seen by Wayne as being able to have that character, but then also to have my relationship with Ed, wonderful friends, and we've danced throughout the years ever since I moved here. And so, like I said before, being part of a creation, there's always a sense of ownership, and I imagine the first time I see someone else do that role, I'll feel a little bit nostalgic, I'm sure. It's quite a privilege, really, to have something created on oneself, and I value it so much. I'm really counted as one of the great fortunes of my career to have those opportunities.
You talked about the instrument in the cellist. It was such an amazing journey because it was quite a long process of creation, and to get to the point that it got to, it was such a journey. And I think that's what it's so exciting about, like going through the ups and downs of really trying to believe that you're doing something that is exciting, new, challenging, and that is going to broaden as well what a role of a man can be in dance. And when I got the opportunity to play an instrument like the cellist, and it's such an iconic one because it's Jacqueline Dupre and they have such a deep connection.
I should say, so the idea of the cellist was that is around the story of Jacqueline Dupre, and she sort of had two loves in her life. One was Daniel Barenboim, and the other one was the cello. And so Kathy used that as an idea to play that, and so Marcelino was the cello, really, the other part of her life.
And it was so beautiful to try to imagine what a cello must feel like, and how the love that Jacqueline put into it and the hours they spent together, how must have that felt, if he could feel. And I mean, that when I debuted that role and I did it, I really felt like my career advanced a bit more, and it felt like this is what I want to do more of creation, be part of more of these new classics, like you've done so many of them. So I feel like that's something that is really fulfilling in his career, especially at the Royal Opera House. I think it's a house of creation, like I said before. It's trying to push boundaries, and I feel like to be part of that wave is amazing.
So you're also involved in choreography, if I'm right in understanding. Could you tell us a bit more about that and how you as a dancer both perform, but you also create yourself?
So I was very lucky. I come from Portugal. I'm from Lisbon, and one of my first teachers, I think I was 12 years old, I started doing some local competitions, and in those competitions you do like a contemporary solo as well. And I've always been really excited about the fact that I could just run around the studio, throw myself on the floor, and do all sorts of wild movements, because I was so constricted in classical. I felt very like it wasn't as natural. So when I had the opportunity to be with her in the studio and create so many things, she always made it very exciting, because she really wanted me to be part of the process. And I feel like that's how I developed the feeling of wanting to be part of a creative process, and and as well give that to others. I love being in the studio, not just because I'm creating my own work and fulfilling my ideas that I've been thinking about for so long, but as well to get something out of the dancer. I love seeing, working with, especially at the Royal Ballet, I get to work with amazing colleagues, people with talent beyond belief, and my ideas are like this and they make it look like that, and I love that process, and sometimes find something so interesting on a dancer that maybe they didn't know they had. I love seeing that as well. That fulfills me a lot, almost like as much as dancing. So I feel like that's why I keep pushing on this choreography train, and not just choreography as I think maybe Wayne McGregor, all these amazing choreographers do as well, but movement. I love being able to direct movement and show my vision through what movement can do, and I think that's a very exciting world.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And also, I mean, you mentioned how you were born in Lisbon and how you had that sort of passion kind of embodied you from a young age. I realised that we hadn't spoken about your backstories as well. Could you tell us about your journey to where you are now, and I suppose in appendix to that, how you see your career evolving, and whether you want to take choreography further, whether you have your own projects as well, Sarah, and yeah.
I'm from near the other Cambridge, so I'm from Boston, and I lived there until I was 23. I was a principal with the Boston Ballet, and then I came here, and I've been here since. I went to a normal academic school, so I only did ballet in the afternoons for about 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. I would take the train into the city. So I had probably less similar background to most dancers in the Royal Ballet. They went to the Royal Ballet School at some point. Marcy went much later, just for a year. A few of the principal dancers, probably the ones who are from other countries, probably went for just a year. But I'm one of the few who danced in another company for a while before joining. So I had a different path to this country, but my father's British, so yeah, things weren't too much of a culture shock for me.
So I was born in Lisbon. I started doing African dance when I was around very young. From a very young age, I was kind of like the mascot of this little African dance group. And I was very lucky that there was this lady that spotted something in me and said, I think you should try and do some class, try to join the conservatoire in Lisbon. And I went on to audition, got in. And then my progression through ballet was fascinatingly quite fast, and somehow I felt like it really was something that I was meant to do, and it never really felt much. I never felt special or like especially talented or other areas, but there I suddenly felt I'm home, which is such an unusual connection, African dance and ballet, but it matched. And then I did a couple of competitions with my school. That's why the contemporary as well evolved, and the classical competitions. And then I got a scholarship to come to the Royal Ballet School, which I completed 2 years, and then got a contract by the director, and then joined the company. So I think once you're in, it's almost like a train then takes you in the direction that it has to be, isn't it? If you don't have any injuries or anything like that. But
oh my goodness. And how do you sort of like feel like you've evolved, and how do you see the future headed after your ballet career? You know, as a dancer, you have a set number of years where you can perform on stage, and what do you kind of see yourself sort of doing afterwards? Or if you have any ideas, are you still keeping things open?
You're still young, so you're quite a long time. Yeah, it's a very difficult thing. I think a lot of people fall into teaching because those who can do, those who can't teach. No, I won't quote that. That's not true. That's not true. I think teaching is actually a calling, and it might be my calling. Everyone in my family is an academic teacher except me. So I am interested in that to a certain level. I'm not quite sure where I will go after this. I have a lot of interests. Haven't really made a path, but I'm not as hubristic to assume that I know exactly what's going to happen. So.
Well, at this moment, I do believe that my role will be in the arts. I think it's a world that I feel very comfortable in, and again, that thing about cultivating something new on someone, or exploring an idea with a young dancer, or being part of a creative process is something that really fulfills me. So I hope that that's my path. I would hate to leave the arts because it's where I feel at home. But yeah, I would imagine that my path is going to be around this kind of creative world, hopefully. Everything was...
Wishing you all the very best in your dreams. And also, I suppose, kind of lastly, before we kind of open the floor to the audience, questions of diversity, for instance, whether in regard to gender or race or other factors, are a really important consideration for the creative arts industry. Kevin and I kind of touched on it earlier too, but how do you feel like the ballet is navigating these concerns, and how do you feel as dancers as well, dancing in this milieu?
When I joined the company, Monica Mason was the director, so I had a female director in Boston, actually, as well, hired me when I was 17. So I never saw ballet as always directed by men. And Balanchine, who's a very famous ballet choreographer, he choreographed some of the greatest ballets, neoclassical ballets, not story narrative ballets per se. he said ballet is woman, and I do think that if you look back at the history, that women were protagonists way before they were allowed to be the protagonist in the theaters or in other roles in life. So I don't think that it's, you know, I've never felt like I've had less of a role to play. There's always an equal amount of male and female dancers, pretty much, and oftentimes there's only a few male dancers when you're younger. So it's I don't feel gender has been a difficulty. I do think that diversity has been a huge problem, and I think the company has come a long way. It's amazing to dance with some young talents like Marcelino, and I first danced with Carlos Acosta in Boston. That's one of the reasons I came over to the Royal Ballet. I was able to dance with him, and it was such a wonderful experience. So I've been very fortunate to have danced with some phenomenal dancers and bringing in the next generation as well. So I think that it's changing. I do think that access is a big problem. I think it's very expensive to go see the ballet, and I think people are working on that, but I think, you know, we need to do more to make it a place where someone will feel comfortable, and I think a lot of that is the way that the decorum is in the theater. And I mean, I don't want people shouting and having, you know, a fight while I'm dancing, but back in the day, that's the way all theater was, you know, it was very vocal. So I think that there has to be another way to bring theaters, and perhaps to bring it into another venue, bring the audience into a place where they feel more comfortable would help. And I know that there is work going on there, and I hope it continues.
Since I joined the company, I've really truly felt that me being doing well, working hard, getting to the place of my dreams would really help attract people to come and maybe have a go at watching. Because once you see yourself in something, once you see someone succeeding, like I saw Carlos Acosta when I was very young, there was no doubt in my mind that I could do it. There was just literally it wasn't a shot. I just thought like, oh, he can do it. I'm gonna get there as well. And so I never really felt like it was an impossibility. What I've felt as well is that in the past few years, working in the theater, working in an institution, I feel like when you start seeing more diversity in all corners of the theater, when I'm talking about the canteen, the dressing team, the canteen people, I think when you start seeing that the whole theater is involved in really like engaging with diversity and really developing it, you start feeling more at home. Has been such a huge change throughout the years. Even when I joined the company, I've always been looking out for someone that looked like me, and the more the company cultivates that, as he has really welcomed more people and has made me, for example, feel more comfortable. Because again, like when you're in a space that you feel a bit lonely, you might feel a bit insecure about your position. But once you're in a place that is really thriving and really looking to make the change, you can see the young people joining the company. There's a different way that they engage with the company, and I feel like that's very exciting. And it's only the beginning. I feel like it's becoming more and more like that, and I think that's so cool. And the young generation is really interesting as well. Very outspoken, way more than I was when I joined the company. They are much more aware, and they feel like they can talk about these things much more, which is something that I'm learning as well, because I feel like even coming from Portugal, which is a country as well that is in this infancy in the development of all talks, diversity and gender and all these things. I feel like once I got here, my eyes opened already, and I've learned so much since. But in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been an amazing change, because these young members have helped me as well, putting towards what I've wanted to tell for so long, and it's been amazing.
And I lied when I said that was the last question, because there is one final question to everyone. So what do you feel is the relevance of ballet today, I suppose, and what kind of, how can it be made accessible to a broader audience, and what makes ballet so important to all of us now and everyone kind of going into the future? This can be.
I think basically it is what we see today, the different people coming together, working together on great creative projects, and people having access to that. And where we can, it's great to hear Marcelino saying, we're doing better, we've got to do better, we've got to keep going, we've got to push those barriers and get out there and get as many people to be either involved creatively or to come and enjoy what we do, because it is there for everybody. And we want as many people to join in what we believe can touch people's soul. And we all want to be moved when we go anywhere. And collectively, I think that's what we've noticed over after the pandemic, there's something about collectively being in a group, just hearing you all applaud at the end of Sarah and Marcelino, just feeling that power of a collective sharing something together and witnessing something beautiful together, I think is very important.
It's catharsis, isn't it? Like, yes, catharsis, because we all have emotions and we all share them to different extents. We don't react to everything the same way, but we do have a reaction. And I think that's what theater gives you. And great theater hopefully really does move you in whatever way it does. Your reaction is completely valid, and that if you are in a theater where you feel that everyone is able to engage with what is on stage, then I think that's the value of that. And I think oftentimes to bring younger people in, I think this sort of environment is more inviting, and I think that it's more interesting, especially for younger people, to see rehearsals, to see it up close. I think there's something much more relatable than when it's quite far away from you and it's on a screen and it's not as nice as your screen that you can watch Netflix on. And, so that, I think that gives a distance. And I think bringing young people into I hope we can have more open rehearsal type events, because I do think that that's more interesting to the youth. But I'll ask you guys later what you think about that.
What is interesting about ballet is that it's art in motion. It's really imagining those amazing Renaissance paintings and all in motion, like those people inhabiting this stage, and I think that's something like Giselle, that you see this time and place, and you can really see a story develop around the costumes, the lights, the whole atmosphere. I think that's the brilliance about ballet. And then when you come and see something like Dante, you see almost an abstract take on something so classic like Dante. And I think that as well shows the breadth of what ballet can be. And I feel like that's what it's so exciting. I think that's why it will always be relevant, in my opinion, because it can be so many things in one, and so complex and so complete.
Very much. And now we'd like to open the floor to audience questions, if anyone has any. Yes? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for letting me ask a question, and thank you for your performance today. It was really wonderful to watch. Building off what we've just been speaking about, diversity, my research in my master's is about how we can improve diversity in the theatre, in the UK theatre space, especially subsidised theatre and charity and theatres that work in the charity space as well. So I want to know from you guys what you think the next steps are in this space, specifically in ballet, because I'm interested in stories like La Bayadère and, some of the aspects of the Nutcracker that maybe are problematic storytelling, even through to things like microaggressions in terms of colour of tights and point shoes that are slowly improving but need to get better. Because from personal experience, I have never seen another South Asian in a ballet class in my life. And it's amazing to see dancers like you, Marcelino, being on stage, because it's the same for me as you, seeing someone like me is on stage. So how can we get younger people into the audience to see that representation and feel comfortable in that space? Is it about the stories that we tell? Is it about how they feel in an audience, the microaggressions, or seeing themselves in senior management? What do you guys all think are the next steps in that process? Thank you.
Yeah, it's exactly what we're wrestling with now, actually. And as I say, we've started on that journey. And interestingly, you mentioned Nutcracker, and sort of quite proud that quite a long time ago we changed parts of the dances in that. And we're continuing to do again. Peter Wright at 95 was in the studio to see a new version of the Arabian dance that we wanted to do. So constantly looking at that through fresh eyes. And one good thing about the pandemic is that we did have time to talk. And as Marcelino said, the dancers, hopefully feel they've got more of a voice now. And we brought in this thing where not just our diverse dancers within the company, but everybody in the company had a consultation about how they wanted to be seen on stage. So the color of their tights, the color of their shoes, and all of those things. So I think that the first steps, but we're trying, we've got a long way to go, and we've had a lot of history to get through, but I think it's really important. And I think the idea of stories you tell is really important. Marcelino mentioned Crystal Pite as somebody that works with us, has worked with us quite a lot now. And, to see how she tells the story of the mass movement of people and immigration in a really moving and real way, I think that's really important for us as against all the other things. And of course, we're always looking at those classics and how we retell them. But and we want the space for anybody to come to work with the Royal Ballet to be the space for them, and it's preparing that space for them. And and as Sarah said, we don't come from very rich backgrounds, but we've all had help, but we must make sure that everybody has a help to get through and to have that chance to become who they can be and the best of what they can be. So that's what we're working on.
Yeah, I think as well is the accessibility. You talked about accessibility. I'm the perfect example of being propelled to this world that I was not prepared for or knew nothing about. And I feel like programs like Chance to Dance, the Opera House do that. I think is as well exposing children of all backgrounds to be able to take a class, or because sometimes it might just click. And I think that the constant looking out and opening doors is what it's needed, and I feel like it's happening. But I believe that that's the future as well, to bring people of more different backgrounds and cultures, is to propose an open and an ideal idea of what this is, because there's such an ideal of what a prince looks like, or there's all these crazy ideas that really in the end are not there, really don't exist, but have been put into our heads almost as an ideal idea of what ballet is. But ballet is so much more than that, and I think that's why I think the future of ballet is so much broader, because there's so much more to it. And it's just ballet is an old art form, but if you think of the history of the world, is still in its infancy. It's still like there's a lot more to happen to it, many more chapters. And of course, the beginning chapters haven't been the most open and exciting, but I think we are heading towards the more inclusive, and I do believe that it will happen. I have hope.
Do you have any?
So maybe
Yeah.
So your performance was really, really beautiful. And I was wondering if when you watch ballet now, it sort of has lost any emotion or any beauty, or actually, especially in performances in roles that you've had in the past, or if actually the knowledge you have has improved your viewing experience.
They spoke about this in there was a ballet made where we had a small narration at the beginning of it, and I alluded to Mark Twain's essay Life on the Mississippi, and it's about a riverboat captain who doesn't really see the beautiful sunset on the river anymore. He just sees the shoals, and he sees, what parts he has to avoid, what parts he has to be mindful of. And I think to a certain extent I see so much of ballet through the eyes of someone very familiar with technique. So I think that sometimes it's difficult not to be kind of counting the times that someone is, you know, in a non-aesthetically pleasing position. But when you do see someone quite wonderful and phenomenal, then I absolutely do still get that lift and those goosebumps and completely, I think maybe it makes it even more special because despite all of my knowledge, I'm still being transposed into this other state of being and really quite transformed, you know, emotionally. And interestingly, also, I do think that once you know someone, of course, I'm sure it's hard to, you know, edit your friend's writing, whereas it's very easy to edit a stranger's writing, you know. So I remember joining the company, I didn't know anyone, and I felt like I watched everyone much more objectively than when, you know, I knew that so-and-so had, you know, he had a dodgy knee, but he did so well despite the dodgy knee, you know, whereas a few months ago I would have just been like, no, he didn't do that well at all, you know. So it's so difficult because, you know, we're hopefully not robots, and we do have, you know, a lot of compassion for one another. So yeah, absolutely, it's very mixed. It's a very interesting question, and I think, you know, someone who's flying a plane probably never just can say, wow, look at the plane, look at the sky, you know. Absolutely not. So I'm sure this goes for absolutely every single discipline that all of us study or devote ourselves to.
How do you, because I don't know if you know, but Kevin watches every show that we do, every matinee evening, every show. So how do you feel? Because I wanted to know your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I think because it's a long time since I did what they did, and I was nowhere near as good as them. But I really don't have that feeling of. So I think I do see it through an audience's eyes much more. Of course, I know what a technique of it and certain things, but I do feel I see it through fresh eyes of how an audience would are when they're watching something. And I try, and of course, when something happens, like a pirouette doesn't work, or, you know, I realize when I was a dancer, that used to be the worst thing. Oh, I fell off this, or this wasn't as good as last time. And what I try to tell the dancers now is that doesn't make the performance. It's about the feeling that they create together, and how, whether it's a story or whether it's in an abstract way, the feeling that they bring across to the audience. And so I do, I sort of feel half amateur, half professional, you know, with it. But it's really interesting, and people go, gosh, you're watching every performance, but every single performance is different, from the orchestra, from the dancers, from the lighting, from all of those things. And it's fascinating seeing how it evolves, you know.
I have one final question, maybe Alex? Yeah.
It's maybe a bit like asking you to pick a favorite child, but I was wondering who has been your favorite character to perform, and which is your personal favorite ballet to watch?
I think my favorite ballet that I've performed has been Romeo, in Romeo and Juliet. I just think there's such real feelings that I can connect so truly, and I feel so honest. I feel like I have not put anything on, and I can really fulfill I can really feel him. It's kind of weird to say, but I can really imagine how he feels, and it's so well choreographed and so well staged, and it really feels, and after you're distraught, I felt so exhausted for a week, basically, after doing those shows. Yeah, I think it's really, really, really special. But I think my favorite ballet...
I'll just give a quick plug. On the 14th of February, you can see Marcelino in a cinema near you. Bring your partner, your loved one, and enjoy it. So I thought I'd just put that one in.
I think my favorite ballet, again, from the same choreographer to watch, it's quite a complex ballet, but really interesting. It almost feels like a Wagnerian opera, almost. It's Marling. It's a story of Crown Prince Rudolph, and
it's historically quite accurate. It's very interesting, actually.
It's complex. It's exciting, and it's very innovative for what story ballet, what people think that story, how ballet can tell a story. It's very, very cool and incredible. I think it's one to watch.
Yeah, you're right. It is like picking a favorite child. So Thank you for that. No, yeah, I'll have to give a few answers, but I agree with Meyerling in terms of I performed 2 roles in that. So I've performed the mistress who kind of sets up the entire denouement because she puts Rudolph with his child mistress, sort of. And so I've done the Mary, who's the child, and I've also done Marie, who is the sort of the orchestrator of the entire affair. So those are quite different characters, but to know the ballet so deeply is quite satisfying. I think Manon is a ballet I really love to dance, and it's like living an entire life in that. But also Juliet is the same way. You are able to take someone from not yet 14 summers and take her to her death, and she does have, I think, so much wisdom. At the end, she's really sees life more clearly than anyone else on stage, really. So in terms of fulfillment, I would take the narrative ballets more than the purely classical in terms of fulfillment. Thank you.
There's one more, actually. I just thought about it, sorry. But this is more in a contemporary world, because I feel like it's kind of hard to compare contemporary and classical. I think Betrothal Night by Crystal Pite is another one that it's cinematic. It almost feels like a Christopher Nolan movie, but in a ballet. And I think it's so cool how she can almost turn the theater upside down with her amazing choreography and concept. So I thought I needed to say that.
Question, or there was a lady behind?
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for being here today. My question is around the acting side of it, the character exploration and development. I'm curious if there's structure or specific training, or if it's more personalized to each person. My background is in the performing arts, but in musical theater and acting, and I'm really curious how your process in character development compares or contrasts to that other part of the arts.
I think it depends what school you go to. So I didn't have drama class in ballet, but I went to a normal high school, so I took drama. But I think once you get into the company, there's especially the Royal Ballet is very well known for having quite high caliber acting, very realistic, and it's very different. I've done Giselle with the ballet company in Kazan, and any kind of Russian company, they do a very stylistic way of acting, and like when Giselle has her mad scene, they just all turn away, and there's no, oh my God, like, is this embarrassing that she's, going crazy in front of this, or like, I'm so uncomfortable, I want to leave, or can't anyone help her? There's none of this. But I don't think that we necessarily have training. I think it's sort of a bit of osmosis, really, once you're in the company. And then I think that most dancers who do end up reaching the top probably explore in their own way acting or theater, or maybe just have it innately to a certain extent. It sort of is in a way. There are some who will thrive more in those roles, and some who will, be more suited to something that's less narrative. But I think Kevin still enjoys putting people into a challenge.
What's interesting is that, Sarah came fully formed as a, principal dancer, but Marcelino, when he joined the company, he did everything. So, as he said, in Giselle, he's been probably every character, and in Romeo and Juliet, he's been Mercutio, he's been in the mandolin dance, he's been in a court, in the ballroom scene. So I think through living it and being with those people that he's on stage with, Carlos Acosta or Vadim Monteiro, all those people, and so you learn, and you can see, and we do a lot of performances, and you can learn what you feel works and what can work for you. And then having one of our other ballerinas the other day said to me about Giselle exactly that, what Sarah's saying. She's like, oh, it was so great. The company was so with me, you know. She's been away and just had a baby, and she's like, this is why I do it, because people are interacting with me, making this story come to life. And I think that's how we sort of do it. Sometimes, you know, the coaches will talk about the intricacies of the role, but I think it really is that lived experience that we go for, and that naturalistic experience.
Like you said, being part of the corps de ballet, you sometimes spot that great actor that is just natural, someone that really feels comfortable and can really tell a story. Just maybe like when Giselle is having that mental breakdown, there might be someone that is really like giving a crazy, amazing performance, and sometimes that's how you spot them. And I feel like that's the exciting thing about the growth of being in a company, because some people are more natural and you learn with your colleagues, and it's such an amazing experience in that aspect, especially in the Royal Ballet, where you actually have to be parallel, like a real person on the side, and really feel those, like try to put yourself in that situation rather than like trying to think of your turnout and how your neck is looking when someone is about to die, you know. It's like really like feel it in your gut, and that's how you learn. Yeah. It's really cool.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your fantastic questions. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but thank you very much to Sarah, Kevin and Marcelino. It's been a truly enchanting evening, and thank you everyone for your questions. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a safe journey home. Let's just give a final round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.